London. I think we were both happy to be moving on. I mean, my acting career had come crashing to a halt in Sydney, and it was obvious I wasn't going to be a film actor. And I was now on a different path anyway, on a different vector. I felt this spiritual path was the most important thing in my life. And I think my wife backed me up, and she also was interested in Sahaja Yoga. And I must say, in many ways, she became a much better Sahaja Yogi than I could have ever been. And she was very good at socializing and mixing with the people, and she seemed to sincerely enjoy it all. So going to London was quite a good move for us. We found ourselves booked in to stay at the Chelsham Road Ashram in South London, and I didn't know that area at all. So it was kind of new for us and everything. Walking up the driveway, the window was smashed. There was piles of junk inside the living room. Inside the house, the plaster was falling off the walls. There were pipes sticking out everywhere that didn't work. Water didn't flow, electricity problems, damp, and all sorts of strange things. But we were welcomed by some lovely young yogis who were similar in age to us, and we were shown a room on the second floor overlooking the street that was to be our bedroom. So it was it was not the Australian style where everything was perfect and everything was fixed. This was the British style, and I soon fell into the British style and loved it much more because it was far more laid back, far more less rigid, far more just fun and non-judgmental. So it was, started to work out quite well, and we were mixing in, we were meeting people, and it was a great new environment. And I just felt the British yogis, they did not judge. That's one thing I found, and was very strongly, and I loved it. There was no judgment, there was no moral judgment on people. And I felt tremendous moral judgment in Sydney just because I'd been a drug addict and everything like that. And I still was a drug addict, still had my struggles. Anyway, we settled into the ashram, and we started meeting a lot of people. We were supposed to get up for meditation at 4 a.m. in the morning, which wasn't so bad in summer months. But as the winter crept around, it was very challenging. And I was told one day that Shri Mataji was arriving from overseas at London Heathrow, and that I could go down to meet her. I had known her only from the meditations and from her talks. And so this was a kind of a new reality, which was a bit daunting for me because suddenly I felt, wow, I'm going to meet somebody very special. I just did not know what to expect. I arrived down there on the appointed day, and she was standing with a group of yogis across the arrivals hall. And I can't remember walking towards her, but it suddenly seemed that I was in a weird dream and I was being kind of shot through a telescope, and every section of the telescope was like a dimension. I was being shot through one dimension, 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, and I just arrived standing in front of her, absolutely speechless, but full of joy, just looking at her. And she was saying to the other yogis, "What's wrong with him?" And they said, "Oh, don't worry, brother. He's just happy to see you. He's happy to see you." Uh, and the vibrations were tremendous. So that wasn't the first time I'd been dumbstruck. Um, but I often think back on that moment and think it was such a momentous occasion for me, meeting the Adi Shakti. I wish I had kind of behaved better or performed in a better way. And yet that was the reality as it was. And one just had to leave it and accept it. Now that Sri Mataji was back in London, She was going to public programs at Caxton Hall and Hampstead Heath, and my wife and I were able to see her much more regularly. And he listened to her talks. And while we took it for granted that Mother was there for us to hear our problems and correct us and guide us and give us motherly advice, it was just wonderful. And I hope we didn't take her for granted, but I think maybe we did to some extent. Many a time at the end of the programs, every single person in the hall would get a chance to go to Mother's feet and maybe to ask a question and receive vibrations. Once Mother gave a talk at Chelsham Road, and afterwards in the street outside, all the young men gathered around her and they shouted out, Bolo Shri Bhagavati Mataji, Shri Nimala Devi, Ki Jai. And that just seemed so fantastic to me, such a revelation. I hadn't realized that they were calling her God and they thought of her as God, and I had never thought of that myself. She was, after all, a mother with her own family. She ran a household. She traveled overseas, giving programs. We worshipped her and did puja to her. Yet she'd go shopping, wearing a headscarf like any other British mum. And the vibrations were so intense. And I think it was hard to get your head around it all and accept it without you having to realize this was a Maya. This was Mahamaya. In fact, the only way she could be seen before us is by conjuring up Shri Mahamaya. Otherwise, it would have been too much for us to take. And I often think about how she protected us so many times from great boots, great rakshasas, great demons who had come to destroy us to this earth. And yet she was always there protecting us. And she often took those demons close to her to kind of neutralize them. So I'm very aware how she loved and protected all of us. It's tremendous. And she still does, of course. There was also a new ashram being formed at an old nursing home with a big back garden called Nightingale Lane. And it was there that we attended our first full-length puja, 1,000 names of Sri Shiva. There was a Havan first, and at the end, again, every one of us was allowed to go to Mother's feet. I had read The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis and had a vivid image of the children standing before the lion, Aslan, and Aslan looking down at them with a massive face and a massive head. And when it came to my turn at the end of the puja, I went to Shri Mataji's feet. I bowed down and she lifted her feet so that I could place my hands underneath them, palms upward. And then she placed her feet back down upon my palms and I rested my head on top of her feet. And when the time came, she sort of released me. And I looked up at her face and it was just massive, like the moon. And she was smiling down at me with just compassion, with humor and with tremendous love. Her eyes twinkling. And that was just so moving. That was to me the real Aslan. I think in those days, it was just so hard to absorb what was really going on. She was just there for us. And sometimes she invited us to her house. She fed us, just like your normal mum, but she was the divine. It was tremendous. I began reading William Blake and got inspired by Jerusalem, where Blake mentioned that lions shall roar from Muswell Hill, Highgate, Hampstead Heath, Crouch End. And I thought, yes, I want to be one of those lions. I am one of those lions, because he was talking about us. He was talking about Sahaja Yoga, and he was talking about the people that would come up in the New Jerusalem. And it inspired me, and I thought, yes, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something. You know, I went to school in Muswell Hill as a secondary student, which began the year we turned 12. And it wasn't a very good experience for me. The transition from childhood to teen was very traumatic. I was heavily disturbed in many ways in my dreams and my sleep. And I got bullied, and I got called names and humiliated at school. I began smoking, drinking, taking drugs about 12, 13. And I thought, no, I should try to go back and do a program there. So feeling kind of proud to have that connection in a funny way, I decided I would book the public library in Muswell Hill and start a program. I got some posters made up, and a yogi from Chelsham Road offered to help me. And he drove us both to Muswell Hill one Saturday morning. But just before arriving, a problem arose with his car that had to be fixed. So I was left to do the postering on my own, a common theme in my life. We met back up at the lunchtime at a local cafe, and he had fixed his car, which was good news, so we could go back to South London. As it turned out, there was an old schoolmate of mine that joined us at our table, and he was one of the guys that had bullied me when I was younger. And I didn't feel anything except forgiveness and compassion for him, because I could see he just was not receptive to what we were representing or what we were doing. We told him about the programs and invited him, but I could see he was in a different path, and he was on that worldly path. And the spiritual side of him was not awake. So that was strange that happened. I ran the program for about a month, and we had a few attendees, and it was very low key. The kind of leader of London came to one of the programs, and afterwards he said to me, "Oh, you didn't do that very well." I didn't know. I just shook my head and said, "Oh, okay." You know, he didn't say what I'd done wrong, but he wasn't very impressed. But I did my best in those days. I wanted to do programs, and I did a lot of programs. I wanted to give mothers blessings to other people. But anyway, that program did fizzle out. Eventually, I couldn't sustain the travel there. And also, I found out that somebody had tried to start a program up a year or so before me up there, and it hadn't worked out either. But I often think that someone has to go first to open the pathway up, to make the initial track. And then we follow that, and then someone follows that. And so eventually it works out. And I was pleased to find out many years later that an ashram had been established in Muswell Hill, and it had remained there for a number of years, giving realization and spreading mother's vibrations. So I thought, look, Blake's prophecy, it's worked out through me. And I felt blessed. I felt very blessed. Mother often gave us little jobs to do or errands to run, various things, anything we'd be happy to do. One day she suggested that a group of us young guys, you know, we were in our late 20s, early 30s. She said, go off to the TM program they were having in the City of London and see what they're doing, see what they're talking about, and then come back and let me know. So we said, yes, Mother, and we went off. It was really heavy. It was very heavy. You know, it was an unpleasant experience. And we sat there kind of grimly bearing the awful vibrations and trying to listen to what the hell they were saying, which after listening to Mother, it all seemed like mumbo jumbo, whatever they were talking about. But we got through it and we reported back, and Mother was happy with us. And then when we went home, we just stopped off at the local column and sat down near the park on the grass and had a good shoe beat, tried to clear ourselves out. And we discussed it amongst ourselves, and it ended up fine. The vibrations were good by the end of the evening and everything, but it was wading through a sea of, heaviness at the time. There was another occasion when Mother needed somebody to move a bit of furniture from Brompton Square up to an apartment she was using in Highgate sometimes for some reason. And, it was just like everything she had was beautiful. It's just handmade furniture, beautiful hand woven fabrics, carpets, chinas and crockery and paintings and ornaments and gold and brass, and everything was like an Aladdin's cave inside her house, particularly at Brompton Square. But my guess is she was just having to stay temporarily somewhere else while they were doing some work in Brompton Square. So we had this. We moved up this, like it was a few hundred years old, chest of drawers, and we moved that. And Mother had provided uh, a pizza for all of us to share, or a couple of pizzas, and we were having a feed in the kitchen. And Mother had, unbeknownst to us, she had gone to lie down, and she often had a siesta at lunchtime. In fact, that's where I learnt to have my own siestas from being around Shri Mataji. And I really love my siestas. Um, so I actually went to wash my hands in the bathroom. As I walked along the corridor, I passed the room where Mother was asleep, and the door was half open, and she was lying on a bed on her side. And I just hear this tremendous rumbling. It's like coming from a cave in primordial time. And the vibrations of her rumbles just shook through my whole body, and I felt my heart just trembling with the vibrations. It was like an ancient lion just snoring deeply. And it was such a powerful moment that I was very moved by this. But we, eventually finished our job and our lunch, and then we left quietly to leave Mother to continue her rest. There was a kind of pattern emerging in me where I would get into Sahaja Yoga and meditate and have deep insight and perception. And then I would just as speedily crash out and fall down into the dumps, be depressed, unable to cope, unable to face the world and deal with the reality of it all. And I could not remain too close to strong vibrations without wanting to run after a while. I was finding the ashram life very difficult, sitting for meditation when I could not become thoughtless, joining in collective things when my heart wasn't in it. I wanted to stay in bed and read a book, and I was still going out to work when I could, but my old habits that had seemingly sloughed off my back in the early days started to come back, and I wanted to smoke and I wanted to drink, and I wanted to get out of it. I wanted to stop feeling the inner pain and discomfort I was feeling. One day, my son was found wandering around on the ledge of the window outside our room, 2 stories up. And, my wife, I don't know where she was looking, but she lost track of him. And the neighbours told us. Funny things like that were happening. And the influence of my old life and conditionings could be quite overwhelming at times. I was at least talking with my wife about how I was feeling. She seemed like a much steadier person than me and didn't react to everything as I did. One night I told her I had to get away and was going to stay at an old friend's place in the country in Wiltshire. I crept away from the ashram like a thief one evening, buying some smokes and a bottle of wine on the way. It has taken me nearly 50 years to become fully self-aware and understand the things that I had to go through and unravel. And it's been a painful and difficult journey. I am very grateful that Mother always supported me and gave me strength to take that journey. Back then, though I was just in the beginning stages of self-realization, I have now come far, far from those days. And with a lot of hard work, a lot of pain, a lot of illness and suffering, I believe I'm nearer self-realization than I have ever been. Getting the initial Kundalini awakening is just the beginning of everything. To really know the self, that is the inner journey which I believe we all must take, and we all must learn how to take it, because it's just not good enough thinking about it. It has to be through experience, a transformation. My friend was pleased to see me when I arrived down in the country, and I offered him self-realization. Though he didn't have any interest in that, he was still a good friend to me. I did want to share what Mother had taught us with other people. And slowly, being back in London, I kind of had the chance to go through my old friends and offer it, until I realized that nobody wanted it. Nobody that I knew really wanted it. And so in the end, I didn't even ask a lot of them. I just realized they were not going to be interested. Eventually, I went up to London and found a single room in an apartment to rent for my wife and son to come and join me in. So I wasn't earning much money at the time and just scraping by, and all I had was enough to pay for a room. But I did have a string of good luck working at the BBC, and I earned a few £100s. And with that money, I went and bought a second-hand car, which was a great investment. It really helped us a lot managing our lives. So I drove down to Bristol, where my wife was staying at some old friends. She had eventually left the ashram or been asked to leave. I guess it was a cowardly thing for me to go and leave her, but that's how I used to be. Any difficult situation I had to run from in those days. Anyway, we reunited, and my son was very happy to see me, and I brought them back to London and installed them in our single room. And we kind of kept on with our life. And I was back in my old stomping ground in North London, And so I gradually met all my old contacts and all my old friends, and all the old habits started picking up and carrying on. It was just that was the way it was. And I ended up using heroin and cocaine quite regularly, drinking now and again, but smoking all the time, cigarettes. Uh, my wife would keep a good altar in the room for Shri Mataji, and she liked attending programs, and she made a lot of friends in the collective and seemed to be doing well with the Sahaj structure that was there. And I was just out on the limb, on the outer, and I'd turn up at a program and try and meditate, and people would give me vibrations. But I always needed to medicate in the end, and I had to get away from it. It became this constant battle of in and out, trying and failing, trying and going out, trying. One of my friends at that time, who was a dope dealer, suggested that we apply for council housing. And he offered that we could go to his place and set up in his living room as though we were living there. So we grabbed big bags full of baby clothes and all sorts of things and clothes dryers, and we spread them all around the room. It looked like an old second-hand shop. And I disappeared for the day, and somebody from the council came round and interviewed my wife, and they believed our stories. Well, we were in effect homeless. We were in effect poor and homeless. I never had any money at all. It always went whatever I had. But then a few weeks later, we got a letter, and we'd been given a flat in Finsbury Park with 2 bedrooms and a living room, kitchen, and so it was sort of luxury, and it was freshly painted and renovated. And we moved in there, and that was, the start of the life, this kind of seemingly normal family life that we eventually conjured up out of nothing. I had the son, I had the wife, I had the car, all these things, but inside I was kind of dying. So that was really, in a way, on a superficial way, a very good time, because it was an experience where I felt what it was like to have a lovely young family, even though I couldn't really manage it as such. I couldn't really fully embrace it because there was too much stuff going on inside me, and I was always being driven away from it by my inner world. For a time, it was a beautiful thing, and it was innocent, and I was faithful to my wife, and I tried my best to live up to Sahaj ideals that I'd heard Mother talk about. And I failed in the end, but I tried. One of the great things in the London Collective was that no one ever criticised me for my waywardness. I came and went as I could, reaching for the world of Shri Mataji and the eternal spirit, whilst collapsing into the world of careless abandon and addiction. I actually lived in 3 worlds, I often think, heaven, hell, and earth, all at the same time. And Mother was in each of them. Even when the ego and superego blocked out the sun, she was still there. Nothing exists outside of her. As far as I remember, sometime in 1983, Mother planned a trip up north to give public programs, and a group of yogis travelled with her on the train, including my wife. They were gone for a few days. Then I received a phone call from my wife saying, come and pick her up and go to King's Cross Station and the time of the train and everything like that. At the time, I was running around buying and selling architectural fittings from old Victorian buildings. And I'd got back into sniffing cocaine with heroin, which was a kind of left and right side mix of drugs and sort of made you in the drug center, if you like. So I arrived at the station one day and I was a bit early for the train. I decided to go down to the gents and have a line of some coke and smack. And I snorted it up. And then I wandered up toward the platforms, looking for the platform where my wife's train was arriving. And then another yogi that I knew from the collective passed by, and I looked at him in surprise. I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Oh, I've come to meet Shri Mataji." And it suddenly dawned on me that I had been set up and that Shri Mataji was arriving with the yogis, and I sort of inwardly gulped and thought, "Oh God." But it was too late for evasive action, and I had to get my wife and son. So I went forward towards the platform, and then when I walked down the platform, there was the group of yogis standing as in a kind of tableau, and Shri Mataji there in the middle. She smiled at me, and my kundalini lifted me up and placed me down head first upon her feet. I didn't feel a thing on that hard platform. I was just like light as a feather. I rested my head upon her feet for a few seconds or 1,000 years. There was no other focus for me than those divine feet. When I stood up, I was right next to Shri Mataji. And Mother gave me a smile and she gave me her cheek to kiss. And I kissed her on her cheek, a loving mother accepting her son's greeting. "Come to see me at Brompton Square," she said. "Yes, Mother." Our holy group walked towards the exit. I found out later that my wife had spoken to Mother on that train ride into London about the troubles I'd had giving up with drugs. I went to Brompton Square to see Mother. There were a few yogis sitting around also waiting to see her. Even the old leader from Sydney Ashram was there. It's sad to me to have known so many souls who rose very high in Sahaja Yoga, only to be dashed down later and disappear from the landscape. I cannot help thinking kindly of them all, because all loved Mother, and once we were brothers. I know well from experience, having fallen myself many times, and by Mother's grace been able to return to her, how precious and how fragile we are. That is why the Lord's Prayer is the most important mantra for me, aside from the Maha mantra, because it exhorts us to forgive the trespasses of others as we ask forgiveness for ourselves. I say it every day and have done since childhood. Eventually, I was asked to go in and see Mother. She was in the basement rooms of the house and the light was less. I've always preferred that kind of ambience myself, kind of like a cave. Mother was seated in an armchair and there were ladies attending to her. She greeted me and indicated I should bow down on the floor before her. I knelt down and put my head on the floor, and she worked on my chakras, giving bandhans up and down my spine, giving me vibrations. When I stood up, Mother looked at me and asked, "What do you want?" "I just want to be in your circle, Mother." "Don't worry, you are in." It didn't occur to me that I was going to ask that question, but it just came up from inside me and surfaced spontaneously. I bowed to Mother. It was time for me to go. From that day forward, something changed inside, and I lost the desire to use heroin and cocaine anymore. And within a few months, I was free from those addictions, and I never ever went back to them for the rest of my life. Though I still had the killer addiction of booze that would take many, many years of karma before coming to an end. I just want to say clearly that throughout all my interactions with Mother, though she well knew that I was smoking and drinking and drugging, she never once made a moral issue out of it, never once criticized me or told me off about it. My journey with addiction has been a long and painful road, and I should say, in the end, a boring saga of illness and suffering, but one I had to take, obviously, and I could not possibly have made it without the love of Shri Mataji Nimala Devi. Mother was always surprising and interesting and spontaneous, and she was very whimsical at times and had a wonderful sense of humor. Often when we took things seriously, she didn't, and vice versa. You could never know. But she was, of course, always in the moment, reacting in the moment. And we were, very conditioned and caught up a lot of the time. And we hadn't reached that natural spontaneity that we was, aiming for, really. One time we had a program up in Hampstead Heath in the evening, and Mother was there, of course. She often came. And at the end of the program, people would go to her feet and ask her questions or receive blessings, or she'd work on someone. And this particular night, I went to her feet and I looked up at her and I said, "Mother, when I was younger, I used to go and sleep in Highgate Cemetery next to the graves." I was thinking it was such a terrible thing that I'd done and maybe very damaging. I used to write poems and drink wine. I thought it was very poetic of me, very artistic. And she just looked at me and smiled and said, "No, no, it's okay. You're okay," and everything. And in my mind, I was serious, but she laughed it off. It was funny. As part of my work, I had a Polaroid camera to get photos of architectural fittings, etc., to show to dealers. And I took it along with me to a puja that Mother was being adorned with all the finery and accoutrements of the particular deity she was representing. And at the end, I took a Polaroid photo of her and showed it to her immediately. And she looked at it. She was very happy and smiling. And that was a wonderful moment, just because the vibrations were with me. And I was feeling such tremendous vibrations. I mean, every moment is wonderful when you know the vibrations are flowing with you, isn't it? Another time at a seminar, Mother addressed all of us in the hall and said that if anyone there did not have their hearts in it, they should leave and go outside. And that day I was particularly caught up, depressed, and not able to fully be present for her. But I dreaded the prospect of standing up and leaving in front of everybody there. But I did get up under the spotlight, so to speak, and I went outside a little bashedly. And the seminar went off quite well for everyone else. And eventually, towards the end of it, I saw Mother walking in the garden with some other yogis, and I sort of tagged along the back. I think by that time, toward the end of '84, London was becoming a bit difficult for me. Although I was now off all the drugs, apart from beer and cigarettes, which is nothing, right? Um, my old friends were there, the old networks were there, and a lot of the people I knew were actually nice people. Um, it wasn't like the image of drug people that you have through the news of useless people who were violent. A lot of the people I knew were very nice and friendly, just just kind of like me, interested in arts and things, and also interested in spirituality. One of the things I used to love was getting high and talking about God, which, yeah, spent many hours talking about the divine. A lasting memory I have of England and the beautiful people that I met there was upon our return from France on the ferry after a program with Shri Mataji. The wind was howling, the ferry was lurching and rocking on the waves. The brine was falling over us and into our lungs, the salty air, the spray. And a group of us went to the top of the ferry on the top deck near the funnel. And in a circle, we sang Jerusalem at the top of our voices, bursting our lungs, bursting our hearts. I'll never forget those faces. It was a beautiful moment. So things were kind of coming to a natural end in London for me. And I talked to my wife about perhaps going back to Perth. Her mother was living there, so she would have some support with the child. And she had a network of friends there. Plus, the weather was amazing. The beautiful oceans were pristine. It was quite an attraction. And we both agreed it might be a good idea to buy a ticket. We'd just come into a little bit of money, enough to buy the tickets. And so we just checked with Mother first about whether she thought it was okay, and she said yes. So we bought tickets and we arranged to go and see Shri Mataji to say goodbye. We went over to the place she was currently staying in, just a smaller house somewhere out in maybe Hounslow or somewhere. I really can't remember. And I had some old Art Nouveau tiles that used to go around the fireplace, make the fire grates look really lovely. And I thought, well, they'd be a nice present to take to Sri Mataji. It was kind of rather an unthought out gift, but Mother turned out was very happy with them, and she said that she could get them reproduced in India and she'd use them in one of her building projects. So I thought, oh, that's lovely. And she wanted us to wrap them and sent me out to the kitchen to get some old newspaper. And as I walked down the hallway, I passed the towering CP and we kind of acknowledged each other and walked past each other. There was nothing to say. I brought the newspaper back and we started wrapping. And I was doing it in a kind of, I did a lot of things like in an offhand way. I just wanted them to be over, chores that I didn't particularly like doing. And mother just looked at me, sort of glared at me, and I felt, oh, I was x-rayed by the divine. And from that moment onward, I took much more care and wrapped much more carefully the tiles up. And we got them all packed and everything in a box, ready for shipping. And we were sitting on the floor, me and the wife and the son, and talking to Shri Mataji. And she said to me, do you need any money? Would you like me to give you some money? And if anyone who knows me knows I have a terrible track record with money. I never had any and I always wanted some. But I just could not bring myself to accept money from mother. Perhaps it was a foolish, misplaced pride. I'll never really know, but I said, oh no, it's all right, mother, we're okay. I often wonder if I had taken it, would it have helped my Nabi or would it have, I don't know, would I have broken some sort of, I had a kind of boundaries inside of me that said no. And I can recognize that there was a bit of ego in that too. Mother then gave me a tie, gifted me a tie. I lost all these things. So many things happened. All the things that mother gave me over the years, they've just gone and been misplaced. Um, but we had a lovely meeting with her, and I think she spent about an hour with us. And then we said our goodbyes, bowed to mother, and left. In those days, going to the airport was considered an enjoyable thing. And especially when mother was arriving or leaving, she'd often hold court in the airport lounge and talk to everyone and give blessings and give advice, give vibrations. You never knew what was going on. Imagine I had my own personal experience with Sri Mataji, and there were thousands of people around me, all having their own personal interactions with mother. She saw so many of us and put her attention on thousands and thousands of us and said kindly words to each of us. It's quite stunning. It's quite mind-blowing. One of the things that she had said to me was if we were stopping over in Bombay on our plane journey to Perth, that it would be a good idea if we got off the plane and instead of just changing planes, go into India and spend a bit of time there. So, we jumped to that idea. We hadn't even thought of it. And we said, oh, yeah, it's a great idea, mother. Thanks. So um, that was our new travel plan. And a few yogis came down and saw us off and wished us the best. And I can always remember mother saying something like, I don't know where it was. She wasn't at the airport with us, but at some point in our leaving, she was joking with some other yogis and she said, yes, we'll send them our problems and they'll send us theirs. And I knew she was talking about me, but that's how it all was. So we boarded our plane and we were off. It was goodbye London, and I never returned for about 30 years to make a visit briefly.
What I wanted to talk about being in London was the feeling of this divine connection, that we were under the aegis of the Holy Spirit. And despite all my problems and all the problems and things happening, there was a sense in me, at least, of being under a divine protection in a very holy place, and that my soul was enjoying it so much. And it was a time that I treasure in my heart so deeply. Despite all the problems and things going on, I just felt fantastic, really, because Mother was there in her physical form, and she had her attention on the heart, on the spirit all the time. And we were in the heart of the heart in London. We were in the center of the spirit, the land of the spirit, the heart of the spirit. And it seeped through, and it was as though that it didn't matter what you did or what happened, because you were in the spirit, you were the spirit, and you were in the spirit. You were integrated with the spirit. Perhaps I'm not expressing it very well, but it was a feeling of being at one with the spirit, with the spiritual life. And I loved that feeling. It was wonderful. I had to leave it and go on to face things. But that time was sacred to me, and the people that were there was such an expression of the heart of love there that I felt so deeply. I really needed to feel that in my life, and I did feel it so, so deeply coming out of London. London, my birth town, my hometown, and just the grace of living there when the Holy Spirit was living there in her form, in her worldly form. So very, very grateful for that experience. It was just wonderful.